Hello again, here we are to talk about JavaScript, and today we're going to start a new assignment that will work with date objects. So your goal is to create a library that works with dates. So here we are, we're on lesson number 4. I'll click on the link here in the syllabus, and the assignment link is over here. And there we go. Here's a link to the slides, and then the text of the assignment is below here. Okay, so here's our slides. We're going to work with dates. So the learning outcomes for today are, hopefully by the end of class, you'll be able to define the date object and use its important methods. Also be able to use the date object to generate dates and times and access components of a date. So components are like the year, the month, the day, the date, the time, the hours, minutes, seconds, right? And then also construct functions that expand on the core functionality of the date object. So, why learn about dates? Okay, so dates are used in like almost every application. So every application has some use for the date, okay? So you should know how to use dates. Dates are a core feature in JavaScript. They're built in. You should understand how that core date object works. And last, understanding the date object lets you expand your knowledge of JavaScript, the language, and CS in general. So if you want to learn more about CS, like some of the things that happen in JavaScript are common to a lot of other languages. So learning about them here is just going to expand your knowledge of computer science. So let's talk about time and computers for a moment. So I have a REPL here, and you can go to this link to use it. We'll have some challenge problems in here that we'll come to after the end of this these slides, okay? So, ask yourself the question, what is a date? So you can stop the video here and, take down some notes or think about that. Like, how would you describe a date to someone? So I would say a date is the day of the month and the year specified as a number. That was my definition, right? Okay. In JavaScript, it also includes the time. So, in JavaScript, a date can pinpoint a time down to the millisecond as a number. So we can just use a giant number and convert that to a date, and then it would represent the year, month, day, hour, minute, seconds, and milliseconds. Dates in general, like this number that we're talking about, is a representation of the number of milliseconds since what's called the Unix epoch, right, which is January 1st, 1970. And if we think about any date in JavaScript as a number, it's the number of milliseconds since this point in time, January 1st, 1970, okay? And if a date is negative, it would have happened before 1970, okay? So what is the Unix epoch, right? So it's also known as a timestamp. So people call it a timestamp, and it represents the number of seconds since Thursday, January 1st, 1970, 12 a.m., right? So right when the clock rolls over to January 1st from 1969. Actually, maybe I should put January 1st like that. There we go, right? Okay, and the premise of this is that every day takes 86,400 seconds. So you could do the math on this, right? You could say like, okay, if I divide by 60, I get minutes, and if I divide by 60 again, I get hours, and then if I divide by 24, right, I get a day, right? So that's the Unix epoch. In Unix, the Unix system uses seconds. JavaScript breaks that down to milliseconds. So we can just imagine this number multiplied by 1,000. So essentially, yeah, you can do math with dates. right? So you can take one date, you can subtract it from another, you can take a date and you can divide by 24, you know, right? So let's move on to the REPL example, and if you have someone to work with, you can pair up to solve the problems in the REPLs. I'm going to click on this. I was having some trouble with REPL on my computer this morning, so it was just running really slow. Here's the REPL. So what I did actually earlier was I copied the text from the REPL, just the code, and it's here in VS Code, and this just made it faster for me to work. But you can work in VS Code or you can work in the REPL. So let me clear the console. And here's the code we have. Let's take a look at what happens when we run it. So in REPL, you can click the Run button. If you were in VS Code, you can just type node and then do index.js, right? Because we're going to run this file right here. And then there's some output there, right? So what happened here? Let's talk a little bit about this, and then we'll move on to solving the problems, right? So first of all, at the top here, I made a new date. So to make a new date, you say new and then date followed by the parentheses. So we're making a new instance of the date object, and I've put that in today. And if we don't provide any parameters in the parentheses, the date that you get right here, the date that's returned, is the date when the date object was created. So it's like right at that moment. So right when I ran the code here, the date that I created is exactly the year, month, day, time, milliseconds that this code was run, okay? And then if I log the date, you can see it looks like this, right? So it says, 2021, January 29th, 1600 hours, 32 minutes, 22 seconds, and 507 milliseconds. And the Z, I think, stands for, I'm not sure about this, but I think it stands for the time zone. So this says general time zone, right? So you kind of ignore that. But this is how the date gets translated when we use it as a string, okay? On the next line, I put a comment here that says, like, it's really a number, right? And if we say today.getTime, you can see that on this line right here, it says, I don't even know what that is. What is that in millions? That's thousands, millions, trillions, I don't know, quadrillions or whatever, but this is the number of milliseconds since January 1st, 1970, okay? So years since 1970. So if we wanted to calculate that, we could do math with a date. So you'll notice here, like, I got the number that is the date object. Internally, the date object is a number, right? But when I look at it here, I got the date kind of spelled out, right? And then over here, I'm going to take the date object itself and then start doing some math with it, right? So that's kind of weird, right? So why does that work? Well, the date object is an object. So it's an object like this, right? Let's say, makes an object, right? Right? So it makes an object that looks like this. But the object can have hints in it that say, like, how it should work or what its value should be depending on the context in your code. So when we use console log here, console log wants a string. So when date sees that something needs a string, it returns this. Okay, it converts itself to a string. But when we do math, when it sees a math operator like this, then the date object converts itself to a number, right? And so we can do the math on it. So if I take the date object here, divide by 1,000, then I would have the number of seconds. And if I divide by 60, I get the number of minutes. And then if I divide by 60 again, I get the number of hours. And then if I divide by 24, I get the number of days. And if I divide by 365.25, I get the number of years. And so underneath years since 1970, you can see it says it's 51.079 something years, which seems about right because it's 2021 right now. So 1970 was, 30 years plus another 21 years, right, ago, and then some change. Okay, so you can start trying the challenges here, and then I'll go over them in the next video, right? So, you can go through here, calculate your age, right? Using the date object. I put my age in here, and you'll change the value here, and then you'll get your birthday, and then you can start calculating from there. So try the problems now, and then you can come back to the next video, and we can walk through some of the solutions, okay?